She didn't cry. She didn't panic. She didn't even hesitate. When I asked her directly if she was cheating, she looked at me like I'd just asked something obvious and said, yes. No shaking voice. No apology. No guilt. Just a flat, calm admission that sucked all the air out of the room. I waited for the rest. For the panic. For the regret. For something. Instead, she shrugged and said, I don't regret it. I felt nothing. That was the moment it hit me. Not the cheating itself, but the emptiness behind her words. She wasn't defensive. She wasn't ashamed. She was detached, almost relieved it was finally out. I remember standing there, realizing in real time that this marriage was already over. Not because she slept with someone else, but because she felt absolutely no responsibility for the damage she'd caused. When I asked how she could say that so calmly, she replied, it's already done. I'm not going to pretend to feel bad. That sentence ended everything. Not loudly, not dramatically, just cold. Final. Dead. Before everything fell apart, our marriage looked solid from the outside. We had routines, inside jokes, shared plans. Friends used us as an example of something stable, something that worked. I believed that too. I thought consistency meant safety, that years together automatically created loyalty. We weren't perfect, but I never doubted her commitment. We paid bills together, talked about the future, made long-term plans like they actually meant something. I trusted her in the quiet moments, the normal ones, because nothing felt broken yet. Looking back, that was the illusion. Stability masked distance, and familiarity replaced real intimacy. I was loyal in the way I thought mattered most, showing up, being reliable, choosing her every day even when things felt routine. I assumed she was doing the same. I didn't question late nights or subtle changes because I believed in what we had built. I mistook comfort for connection and history for honesty. The marriage didn't explode overnight. It decayed slowly, quietly, while I was busy believing it was still alive. The changes were small enough to dismiss, which is why I did. She started guarding her phone, angling the screen away from me, taking it with her everywhere, even to the bathroom. When I noticed, I told myself I was being paranoid. Everyone needs privacy, right? Her schedule shifted without explanation. Late nights became normal. Work stuff, she said, casually, like it wasn't even worth discussing. She laughed less with me, sighed more, and seemed irritated by questions that never used to bother her. When I tried to connect, she acted distracted, distant, already somewhere else. Physical affection faded quietly. No big argument, no obvious rejection, just less touching, fewer spontaneous moments. I felt it, but I didn't confront it. I convinced myself it was stress, routine, life getting busy. I chose the explanation that hurt the least. Each change on its own meant nothing. Together, they formed a pattern I wasn't ready to see. I ignored it because acknowledging it would have forced me to question the marriage I was still desperately trying to believe in. There were red flags. I just kept finding ways to excuse them. She became defensive over harmless questions, snapping back with, "Why are you interrogating me?" Like curiosity itself was an accusation. I told myself she was stressed, that I was being too sensitive. She stopped sharing parts of her life with me. Stories came with gaps, details that didn't line up, timelines that shifted depending on when I asked. When I noticed, she brushed it off. "You're overthinking," she said, rolling her eyes. And I believed her, because believing her was easier than trusting my instincts. Arguments started ending differently. Instead of resolving things, she shut down or turned it around on me. Somehow, I was always the problem. I apologized more, questioned myself more, adjusted my behavior to keep the peace. I didn't realize I was being slowly trained to ignore my own perception. Every red flag came with an explanation, and I accepted all of them. Not because they made sense, but because facing the truth would have meant admitting I was losing her long before she ever cheated. The first real crack didn't come from evidence. It came from a feeling I couldn't explain. We were sitting in the same room, doing nothing, and I suddenly felt alone. Not physically alone, but emotionally shut out, like there was an invisible wall between us that hadn't been there before. I said something small, expecting a familiar response, but she barely reacted. Her eyes stayed on her phone. Her tone was flat. That moment stuck with me because it felt final, like I'd interrupted something more important than our marriage. Later that night, I replayed the interaction over and over, trying to figure out what had changed. There was no fight, no obvious trigger, Yet something fundamental had shifted. I felt like I was talking to someone who was already emotionally gone. I wanted to ask her directly, but fear stopped me. Fear of sounding insecure. Fear of what the answer might be. So I swallowed the feeling and told myself I was imagining things. That was the first time I chose silence over truth, and it cost me more than I realized. After that moment, her behavior changed in ways I couldn't unsee. She became colder, more impatient, like my presence was an inconvenience she tolerated rather than a choice she made. Conversations felt rushed. She answered without looking at me, like she was already mentally checked out. She started rewriting our interactions in real time. If I expressed concern, she called it control. If I asked for reassurance, she labeled it insecurity. The more I tried to understand what was happening, the more she framed me as the problem. It was subtle, but effective. I began second-guessing myself. Plans stopped including me. Decisions were made without discussion. She'd inform me instead of asking, as if we were no longer partners, but roommates sharing space. When I noticed the distance, she dismissed it with a shrug. Nothing's different, she said, even as everything clearly was. That's when I realized something important had shifted, not just in her actions, but in her respect. She wasn't just pulling away. She was emotionally detaching, preparing herself to leave long before I was ready to admit it. The lies weren't dramatic. That's what made them harder to confront. They were small, unnecessary, and oddly specific. She'd say she was with one person, then mention details later that didn't match. Times didn't line up. Stories changed depending on when I asked. When I pointed out the inconsistencies, she didn't try to clarify. She got annoyed. "Why does it matter?" she asked, like accuracy itself was unreasonable. That response stayed with me. Honest people explain. Liars deflect. I started noticing how quickly she shut conversations down. Any attempt to dig deeper was met with irritation or sarcasm. She accused me of not trusting her, flipping the narrative until I felt guilty for even questioning her. And it worked. I backed off. The more I ignored the lies, the bolder they became. I wasn't uncovering the truth. I was being trained to stop asking. And deep down, I knew that people don't lie this casually unless they've already decided you don't deserve honesty anymore. By the time I noticed, the emotional distance between us had become a chasm. It didn't appear suddenly. It crept in slowly, almost imperceptibly, until I couldn't ignore it. She stopped sharing thoughts, dreams, even small daily details. Conversations became short, mechanical, devoid of warmth. I tried to reach her, to bridge the gap, but every attempt was met with impatience or polite dismissal. "I'm busy," she'd say, or "You're overthinking." Even her laughter, once effortless, now felt forced or distant. I could feel her slipping away in plain sight, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. It wasn't just coldness. It was preparation. The emotional detachment she cultivated slowly over months created the space she needed to cheat, and to do it without guilt. By the time I realized it, the betrayal was already inevitable, and my attempts to save what we had were powerless against the wall she had built between us. I discovered the cheating in the worst possible way, by seeing something I wasn't meant to see. A text, a photo, words that made my stomach drop and my chest tighten. At first, I couldn't process it. I stared, frozen, heart pounding, mind refusing to accept reality. It wasn't just the affair itself that hurt. It was the realization of how carefully she had hidden it, how calm she was in the midst of her deception. Everything we had built together, all the trust, all the love, it felt meaningless in an instant. When I confronted her, I was desperate for a reaction. Tears, regret, any sign that she understood what she'd done. But she was calm, almost clinical. "I didn't mean for it to happen, and I'm not sorry," she said. The words weren't just cold, they were final. My heart broke in a way that no explanation could ever repair. In that moment, I understood. This marriage was dead, and she felt nothing. I couldn't hold it in any longer. "How could you do this to us?" I shouted, voice trembling, chest tight. I needed her to feel something, remorse, guilt, anything. But she didn't. She looked at me calmly, like I had asked about the weather, and said, "I don't regret it. I felt nothing. It just happened, and I'm not sorry." Time froze. Every hope I had, hope for guilt, for apology, for recognition, shattered instantly. Her eyes held no shame, no hesitation, no flicker of humanity. Just calm, final detachment. I tried to reason, to remind her of our life, our promises, our love. She waved me off. You're overreacting. It didn't mean anything. I don't owe you anything. The humiliation, the disbelief, the icy clarity of betrayal slammed into me. This marriage was over, and she didn't care. Her lack of guilt was the sharpest cut of all. Her lack of guilt was worse than the affair itself. I expected anger, shame, even the slightest flicker of remorse. But there was nothing. Just calm, almost casual acceptance. I don't feel bad, she said, shrugging, as if my devastation didn't exist. It's already done. I don't owe you explanations. I searched her eyes desperately, hoping for emotion, for recognition of the pain she caused. But there was nothing, only sharp detachment. She treated my heartbreak as a trivial inconvenience, something to endure, not something to care about. Then it hit me. She could betray without conscience, abandon without regret, and move on without a backward glance. All the subtle warning signs I had ignored, all the small shifts I excused, they had been preparing me for this moment. This wasn't just cheating. This was emotional death. She didn't just betray me physically. She betrayed our bond, our trust, our history, with absolute indifference. After her words, I collapsed emotionally. The shock faded, leaving a hollow ache that filled every corner of my chest. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and empty all at once. Every memory, every laugh, every promise, every plan we'd made, twisted painfully, now tainted by the knowledge that none of it mattered to her. I kept replaying her calm admission. I don't feel bad. It just happened. I don't owe you anything. Each repetition was like a hammer striking my heart, stripping away the denial I had clung to for months. Numbness gave way to anger, anger to despair, and back again. I wanted to scream, to beg, to force her to understand, but I knew it would be useless. For the first time, I saw the truth. I had been giving everything to someone incapable of empathy. My love, my trust, my energy, wasted on a person who didn't value them. The collapse wasn't just grief, it was awakening. Holding on, begging, and explaining would never bring her remorse. The marriage I fought for was gone, and she didn't care. Rants. The decision to stop chasing her didn't come quickly. It came in the quiet moments after the confrontation, when the adrenaline faded and only the cold reality remained. I realized I had been running after someone who had no intention of turning back. Every plea, every attempt to reason, every hope for an apology was met with emptiness. Chasing her only deepened my pain. Sitting alone, I let myself feel the full weight of what she'd done and what she would never feel. I understood that I couldn't change her, couldn't force guilt, couldn't revive a love that existed only in my mind. That clarity, as painful as it was, brought relief. For the first time in months, I felt control returning, not over her, but over myself. I decided I would stop explaining, stop justifying, stop begging for recognition of the harm she caused. My energy, my love, my respect, they belonged to me, not to someone incapable of empathy. It wasn't immediate healing, but it was the first step toward reclaiming my dignity and my life. Distance became my shield. I stopped expecting her to care, stopped hoping she'd change, and stopped looking for signs of remorse. Every interaction became transactional, stripped of emotion. When she tried to pull me back into arguments or justifications, I stepped further away. I learned to listen without reacting, to feel without collapsing, to protect myself from the damage she no longer recognized. Detachment didn't happen overnight. At first, it felt hollow, painful, almost like giving up. But gradually, it became liberation. I stopped measuring my worth by her actions, stopped letting her indifference define my emotions. I began to see the marriage for what it really was, a bond poisoned by her lack of empathy and deliberate choices. With distance, clarity returned. The chains that had bound me to her guiltless betrayal loosened. I no longer carried the weight of her choices. Instead, I focused on myself, reclaiming the life and dignity I had been surrendering in silent hope she might feel something she never would. Walking away emotionally became the first act of true self-respect. Looking back, everything is clear now. Cheating hurts, but cheating without guilt is the final betrayal. Her affair wasn't just physical. It was the emotional death of our marriage, a brutal reminder that love without empathy is hollow. I wasted months hoping she would feel remorse, that she would recognize the pain she caused, but some people never will. Believing otherwise only prolongs suffering. The lesson I learned, and the advice I wish I could give my past self, is this: when someone cheats and shows no guilt, believe them. Don't waste your energy explaining, pleading, or begging for acknowledgement. Self-respect begins when you stop trying to force someone to care. It's painful, humiliating, but liberating. I stopped chasing, I stopped explaining, and slowly, I began to rebuild myself. Love without accountability is emotional abandonment. Walking away from someone incapable of remorse isn't giving up. It's the bravest act of respect you can offer yourself.